Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion, the off-season edition, of course, for January 28th, 2020. I hope your week is going well. Let's take a look at the SOI, starting off today's tour of what's happening in the world of the tropics. Remember, I like to look at some of these bigger puzzle pieces that we watch in the off-season that may shape the upcoming hurricane season. And partly related to that is the Southern Oscillation Index. That is a measurement. And as it says here, it's an index right here. It's not really a unit of anything, but it's just an index. And it's the difference in pressure in Tahiti, way out in the southwest tropical Pacific, and Darwin, which of course is in Australia. And typically when you see this positive look to it, this rise in the SOI, well, basically when you have this pronounced a rise and the SOI is headed towards positive, you're not in an El Nino, and that's what this is heading towards. That's what I'm alluding to. And so the graph shows this very nicely. We can also go look at the table here, and the contributor today is a solid plus 8 3/4, and now the 30-day average is positive for the first time in at least 3 months. As you can see here, going back to October, we were -5, -9 November, -6 December. And with only 3 days left in the month of January, barring any unbelievable crashes of the SOI, this number here, the 30-day average, will end up more than likely on the positive side. And so the difference between December and January will be an increase in the SOI. Why is that important? It is one of the factors that I look at. It's not the only factor. Some people, it's not their favorite factor. But for me, I've been watching this probably for the better part of 20 years, and it tells me that the background state of the tropical Pacific is not in an El Nino mode full on. You know, there's other variables and other things that you have to take into consideration, but to me, this is a great litmus test, as it were, as to what's going on in the state of the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And another way that we can look at that is by anomalies, the sea surface temperature anomalies. And as you can see, this updated yesterday, the 27th. Not really warm, not really cold, just kind of speckled in between there. A smattering of both positive and negative anomalies. But on the whole, and I mentioned this last week, it seems that the North Pacific is not quite as warm overall as it was last year. Off the coast of North America up here, the West Coast, pretty large area of cold anomalies. Down in the South Pacific, a large area of cold anomalies, but we definitely have this absence of warmth right here along the tropical area, along the equatorial region, and as such, we are in warm neutral. We're not in an El Nino pattern, and probably won't be. And I can show you some evidence as to why I think that'll be the case in just a moment. So when I go back and I look at the SOI, especially this pretty quick rise, these numbers here, this is all leaning towards more, I guess, evidence that we're not going to see an El Nino for the spring and probably the summer. And then you can start looking at the modeling. What does the modeling say? Well, in early January, the Climate Prediction Center International Research Institute, their data suggested kind of, this gray area is your neutral, and then diminishing chances of El Nino through the summer into the fall, with an increasing chance of La Nina, as you can see there. But look at the difference between early January and very recently the mid-January update, especially in the neutral probabilities. Those really, really shot up in just the past couple of weeks. You can clearly see that, and that's where you break down all of this. You look at the different factors that are going in, the SOI, the state of the subtropical Pacific, computer models, all of that gets taken into consideration. And then you have this on top of it, these probabilistic ENSO forecasts, and these are not adjusted. This is not interpreted data. This is just what the computer models are spitting out, and we can look at it in graphical format here that gives us an excellent visualization that at least over the next several months, I think it's very safe to say, neutral conditions will prevail. The odds of El Nino, which is these red columns, goes down, and then they stay pretty level throughout the hurricane season. But then there's this part right here. All right, now August, September, October time frame has moved up a notch, if you will. In the early update in January, back in the beginning of the month, August, September, October was over on the far right-hand side of the chart. Now it has moved over one space because it's getting closer in time, right? That makes sense. So now that time frame has moved up just a little bit, and it'll continue to do so each month as we go out further into time, as you would expect. And so what does that show? And this is important because this is the peak of hurricane season. Neutral conditions, almost 50% chance. El Nino, not even 25%, or maybe right at 25. And I'm not even worried about a La Nina necessarily right now. That's the blue, which is touching on 30%. But it's that neutral and certainly the absence of El Nino that I keep watching. And so we'll see as this progresses and this time frame, August, September, October, gets closer into time. So February, March, etc. That's when we will really start to hone in on this. And I don't see it. I don't see the El Nino coming. And this right here, and I know it's going to continue to do that GIF animation, so I'll ad lib while it's doing so. All of that, and then you go look at this. You kind of, like I say, look out the window. And this is our window to the world of what's happening in the subsurface realm of the equatorial Pacific. And again, the eastern Pacific is over here on the right-hand side of the chart. This is the western Pacific over here, the surface of the Pacific up here at the top. And then this is 450 meters deep. And using a variety of methods and data collection tools, NOAA, oceanographers, etc., gather subsurface temperature anomaly data. And you can see you got this cold area over here that's kind of shrunk away, but then it's come back. See that? And then in the West Pacific, this large area of cold anomalies has become even larger, and we're really starting to chip away now that the animation finally stopped. This huge area of positive anomaly getting chiseled away, more cold anomalies in the subsurface. And like I say, the way I interpret this to me is the future. All through here, you still got to work out this warm blob, and that'll have some influence over the coming months. But this is really interesting to me too, that in the eastern Pacific, at depth, we're seeing an increase and an expansion of the cold anomalies. And the gradient there is pretty steep. I mean, look, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades of blue. I mean, that's all the way over here to -4, -5 Celsius in the eastern Pacific. It's a small area, but it's there. And your only really strong area of positive anomalies is right here. And that's it. Everything else is just kind of, whatever. So all of this taken together shows me anyway, and this is one of the things I like to watch in the off season. It gives me something to do, among other things. And this just tells me, we're not going to have an El Nino this year. At least it doesn't look that way right now. This does not scream El Nino. It does not. And, there's other mechanisms, like I said. And you can talk about this for hours. You really could, but we're not. We're going to try to keep this fairly short. But that's one of the things I watch. And all of this comes together once we get to the hurricane season, is in terms of where the upward motion is, where there's extra heat in the ocean. And right now, going back to this chart, it's in the Atlantic. Very warm off the coast of Africa, fairly far to the south. A kind of mediocre main development region, not too warm, not too cold overall. Very warm in the northwest Atlantic. None of this really matters in January, I guess, but it's interesting to watch nevertheless. But if you had to look at the two and compare them, the Atlantic, I think, is warmer overall than the Pacific, even if it's just by a small margin. So there you go. All right, I've been marveling at this in the off season. The warm water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico cooling off a little bit now. This is the 25 Celsius isotherm, or line of equal temperature right there. The orange color is 26 Celsius, or about 80 Fahrenheit. And so the loop current's still very prevalent. But boy, the southeast Gulf through the straits there, the Strait of Florida, the Florida Straits, whatever you want to call it, That's all still 26, 27 Celsius. And again, this is not going to make the hurricane season worse. The Gulf's always going to be warm to the extent that it'll support Cat 5 hurricanes. And I think we only need to look at Michael in 2018 to know that. It's a matter of how warm it is, how early, that maybe the season gets started earlier. Or maybe that extra warmth and energy and moisture leads to a bigger rain event somewhere. It's all connected. The more heat there is, the more energy there is, because heat is energy. And when you warm up the ocean like that, and it's abnormally warm, and again, back to the anomaly map, yes, right there in the Gulf, it's a little bit warmer than it should be. That tips the scale usually in the favor of more precip, more latent heat, things like that. And we'll see. It's not going to make it a worse hurricane season in terms of more intense hurricanes. It just might help things get started earlier. But remember, warm water alone does not give us hurricanes or typhoons or cyclones, whatever. There's a lot more to it than that. Off the East Coast, again, no major nor'easters up in this part of the world. Only up here in Atlantic Canada have we had such luck. And you can look at it either way, good luck or bad luck. I myself, I'm an aficionado of a good nor'easter. I know they can be deadly and they can have consequences. I understand that, but there's not too many things, in my opinion, more exciting than standing in 70-mile-per-hour wind with blinding snow at Cape Cod, for example. And I've done that in Chatham, Massachusetts, in vicinity, and it is a rush. It really is. And you know what? If you don't like it, that's okay. I wouldn't like it all the time myself. Like, remember 2015, February? It seemed like winter was just piling up on New England. Well, maybe that'll happen again this year. We'll see. It's not looking too promising. But let me get back to sea surface temperatures. Again, the Gulf Stream, very prevalent right there. Northwest Atlantic, warmer than average, as we looked at on the anomaly chart. Really neat graphic, though, as you can see, when you talk about meteorology, and in this case, oceanography. And, of course, the two are interrelated. And we talk about gradients. You can have temperature gradients and pressure gradients. Well, here's a great example of a temperature gradient. And you get these lines that are closer together, and so it becomes darker because you got a lot more of these lines. Think about contour lines on a topographic map when you're talking about geography or geology. And the closer those lines together equals like, a steep side of a mountain. So you have a steep vertical gradient in terms of, gravity, right? Or elevation, which leads to gravity if you're not careful. It can. And in this case, the steepness of these isotherms or lines of equal temperature, remember, that indicates a steep temperature gradient. And another way to look at it, that means the temperature changes quickly over a short distance. There is a high temperature contrast over a short distance. And what I mean by that, it's in the mid to upper 70s Fahrenheit here, but then just, 150 miles to the northwest across that gradient, temperatures drop into the low 50s. So a 20-something degree drop over a short distance. And I think the gradient is steepest probably right here, very close to the North Carolina Outer Banks is a good place for that. So if you left Hatteras or Ocracoke, went out to the Gulf Stream and jumped in, a little cooler than I would like, 24 Celsius, but I guess it's tolerable if you're in a wetsuit. So there you go. That's a look at what we look at in terms of tropical stuff, watching for the off-season indicators. That concludes that segment, well, at least mostly. I did want to point this out, a little advertisement for the National Tropical Weather Conference coming up in April. This time it's going to be at the Marriott Courtyard, a new hotel just down from the old Hilton Garden Inn that we have come to know and love over the past several years, where the conference has been held, but still in South Padre Island, and it's April 1st through the 4th. There's the URL right there, HurricaneCenterLive.com. If you want to register, I will be speaking, Josh Morgerman will be speaking, and then you will have a whole host of other folks. And this particular conference is geared towards broadcast meteorologists, but anybody can attend. It's open to the public. You just have to pay the registration. It's run by a nonprofit group, which is good, so people are not making money off of this. It's not a for-profit event. It helps with weather awareness and related subjects, and so it goes to a good cause, and it's a great meeting. There's not 3,000 people in attendance. It's actually only a couple hundred at best, which is a great thing because it means that it's much more conducive to private conversations with people that you've always wanted to meet. And, when I go there, it's awesome to be a speaker. I will be speaking again this year, but I also cherish the time that I get to spend with other people in the business. So check it out, HurricaneCenterLive.com. And, hit me up on Twitter or post a comment on the YouTubes there if you're going. I'd like to know if you're going to be there. And I'll see you in April. All right, so we segue into lower 48 weather, the other aspect of the off-season discussion. Are we looking out for any big storms? Well, of course we are. Are there any coming? Close but no cigar, it looks like. In today's hazards analysis, just a few winter problems here in the nation's midsection, and the ever stormy and wet Pacific Northwest as storm system after storm system keeps piling up the snow out there. Lots of rainfall in the lower elevations. It's great for the rainforest. And yes, did you know that? They do have rainforests in Washington State. Rainforests are not always tropical, and that's good for those areas. Very kind of cool and wet and damp, but some lush, beautiful rainforest. I hope to get up there someday. So one of the things that we've been watching for, and you might have seen this mentioned quite a bit on the weather social media universe and the, whatever I call it when we talk about hurricanes, I call it the hurricane blogosphere. But the mention in weather geekdom about a potential nor'easter up in this area, why is that there? That's annoying. Okay. All of a sudden we got these pop-ups. I see. We have mail messages or something. Some kind of a infiltration into my system. We'll have to deal with that. Anyhow, I mentioned nor'easters, then I get pop-ups. So up in this area, and is that going to happen? Well, yes and no. This is the GFS operational from last night, the 0Z run, and I want you to focus on this area right here. Keep your eyes on that. I'll move the slider. Watch what happens as we get to the weekend. Boom! The 0Z run last night says, whoa, look at that. Big time nor'easter comes right up through the shores off of New England's coast there. Heavy snow, lots of wind, lots of waves, places from the Virginia Capes north, windy, wet, snowy, icy, stormy, you name it. That's one of your classic tracks. Comes up out of the Gulf, turns the corner, rides up the coast, and then into the Canadian Maritimes. And so I saw that, and I thought, oh, wow, I might be making plans to go to New England for the weekend. I love it up there for these winter storms. So now let's jump ahead 12 hours. What does the 12Z show? Move it out into time. There's the storm. It's off of Hatteras right there at about hour 90, so still about 4 days out. And then you say, okay, here we go. And then right there you can tell it looks like it's going to be too far out. It starts to bomb out, though. That's pretty good, but look at that trajectory. Wah, wah. It starts to bomb out fairly far to the south. Well, not fairly. It's just too far south. And that goes on, probably to the east side of Nova Scotia even, between there and Newfoundland. Maybe another powerful storm for Newfoundland. Maybe I'll go to Newfoundland this time. Wouldn't that be something? Yeah, maybe so. So anyway, the bottom line is there's still plenty of time. This is 5 days out. And you know how that is in hurricane watching and tracking. So there's a lot of room for change. But overall, the operational and the ensemble guidance not really suggesting a high threat for nor'easter time in New England. It's there, but it's just, we're going to have to see some stuff coming west. And we probably need a little bit more cold air than what we're seeing. It's just not the same setup, well, obviously, as 2015 was. But this is into February. And February is to nor'easters as September is to hurricane season in terms of the peak time. The month of February is when you're going to get these big, powerful systems through March, like September and October are for hurricanes. So we'll watch and see. Then after that, there's another one that tries to develop. These systems come in Some of them from the Pacific Northwest, some of them from the Southern Stream system, branch of the jet stream, and now we're talking 10 days out, and that's just too far. But it looks like a very active pattern over the eastern part of the country as we get into February. So the question will be, and the question is, does that equal nor'easter time, where you get the northern branch of the jet stream up here, which is energy and cold air, phasing with the southern branch coming out of the Pacific across the Gulf, etc., these little impulses, will they get together in the coastal waters enough to bring us a powerhouse nor'easter? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That's what we look for. And that's what you should be looking for on Twitter and elsewhere by following people who know about this stuff. You know, I know a little bit, but I like to follow other folks that know more than I. And that helps to expand my knowledge. And yes, you guys out in the Pacific Northwest, it's just one of these bowling balls after another. I mean, there's one there that comes, this is a few days out. And actually, that's today. That came from the Pacific Northwest. Sorry, this is the analysis. There's another one coming in, and as you can see, they just keep on coming, one after the other, into the Pacific Northwest. And look, ridge over the east eventually. This is 10 days from now, so we'll see. Anyhow, interesting pattern as we head into February. All right. Whoops. I killed my slides. There we are. Patreon. That's what I wanted to show you. The podcast series on Patreon, and even our dollar access people. You know, you say, well, I can only do $1, man. I'm not rolling in the dough. Hey, you know what? If just a quarter, 25% of my YouTube and or Twitter followers, combined, not even 25% of one and 25% of the other. And no, that's not 50%. That's 25 of one and 25 of the other. I know some basic math. If all of those folks, just 25% of the combined YouTube, Twitter universe of mine, was at this dollar level, everything I would do would be at $1. You know what I mean? That would be plenty of funding to support the field work, to support my family. And we're getting there. So you folks in the dollar level and up have access to the podcast, to our growing list of original content, and it just goes on from there. There's the podcast there, and stories from the Hurricane Highway. Already talking about the year 2000, and I post our Hurricane Outlook and discussion videos first on Patreon, and it just grows and grows from there. And in the hurricane season, we do a lot, of course. And we got the new series, the Hurricane Highway, which is like a television style series coming up. February 10th, the first episode, the pilot episode, all of that on Patreon right there. We got a couple of new patrons in the last couple of weeks. I appreciate that. Welcome to the future. And it is the future of, I mean, look at what Levi's done with Tropical Tidbits and the folks at Weather Nerds. And there are others on Patreon, creators. You know it. It's the age of crowdfunding. You support what matters to you, what's important to you. And hey, we've got 250-something people that think it's important enough to them, and I'm able to do some amazing things with it. Myself, my team, and it's all thanks to you guys. So if you want to be a part of that, patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. And remember, we're only about 4 months away from the start of the hurricane season, and we're really going to ramp things up again. We'll talk about that later. So join in if you've been curious about it. That's how you do it. All right, I'm also on Twitter at HurricaneTrack. You probably already know that. And if you're new to YouTube, or at least my channel, and you want to subscribe, do so, because you'll get notified when I do a new video. And that's a good thing, I guess, right? At least I hope so. All right, I'm done. That's it from me for today. As always, I appreciate you tuning in from whatever device you happen to be watching and listening from. Hopefully the audio is nice and acceptable today. My new microphone performing as it should. Have a great rest of your Tuesday and a great rest of your week. Thanks again for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll speak again early next week.